Hello and welcome to the 6th installment of our 7-part video series, 3 Critical Questions You Must Ask. Today we're going to tackle the third of the 3 questions, and that is, when you're building something, the third question you absolutely have to ask is, what value does it provide? Why does it matter to somebody? What do they get out of it? Okay, and what's going to motivate them to use it? Right? And possibly use it instead of something else. You have to remember that nothing happens in a vacuum. We all use products every day. And a lot of the things that are new to us quite often replace something else, right, that we were using up until that point. And the reason they replace what we were using previously is because they deliver more value to us in some way. They're more useful, they're more usable, they're more meaningful. They make us better at what we do. They help us learn more. They help us gain mastery or expertise in something. They make a certain aspect of our lives or our jobs easier or more enjoyable or more efficient or simply more accessible. It could be any number of things. But value, as I'm sure you know at this point, is the key to great UX. You've heard me say that word over and over and over again. And now we're going to try to bring all that home, okay? Determining what value something provides starts with understanding the people who are your users in the first place, okay? So the first question that you have to ask is, who is our target audience for this? Who are they? Who are these people? Are they male? Are they female? What's their ethnic background? Which is important because cultural associations play a big role in how something is perceived. And I don't just mean, different ethnic cultures, I mean, period. If you go to different segments of the United States, for example, there are very different understandings of what certain things mean. Different definitions of family, different experiences growing up that may be meaningful to some groups and not meaningful to others, things like that. And finally, in a B2B situation, you also want to know, obviously, what the person's job role is. What's their responsibility? What do they need to have a successful day at work, or to have a successful work experience, or to make them look better in the eyes of their boss, or to make their boss look better? Whatever it is, you have to do some digging to truly understand who these people are and what motivates them. And today, I'm going to give you an example of how you walk through that. So, who's our target audience? Let's assume that we are on the hook for developing an app for pastry chefs. Okay? And in particular, there's a growing number of independent bakeries who specialize specifically in pastries that use fresh fruit. Okay? Hypothetical example. Let's assume that we do some research. We talk to some of these organizations. We go meet with the people who work there. What we find is that the folks who are at the top of the responsibility chain there are essentially the pastry chefs themselves. They happen to be largely, for the most part, African American. They happen to be female. Their average age seems to fall between 35 and 45, which tells us that, okay, maybe they're fairly comfortable with technology because they did grow up with it. At the same time, they're at the older sort of end of the maybe Generation X scale. So while they're comfortable with technology, it's not nearly as second nature to them as like a Generation Y type person, for example. All right, so this is why this detail is important. Let's say that we find out that they are responsible for the food quality. Okay, not only for what gets baked, the final product, they're also responsible for sourcing supplies, right? All the fresh fruit that gets used in their recipes, they are responsible for ascertaining who's the best supplier, when is it the freshest, when should we order it, how do we time all this such that we get the fruit at the right time, in a decent window after it's picked, it's still fresh, it gets here in time, we're able to use it in our recipes, create it, get the stuff shipped off to restaurants, and then when it sits there, freshness is still maintained. Okay, so think about it. There's a lot of calculation happening here in terms of sourcing, quality. There's a lot of information they probably need to know in order to do that efficiently and get into a cycle, a production cycle, delivery cycle, that ensures that they're not sending things to restaurants that expire in a day, right? Okay, so we know something about our audience at this point. That's the first question. Who are they? The next question you have to ask is, okay, now that we know who this is, what experiences are valuable to them? What matters to them most? What's the key component that's going to make them say, oh, that could be really useful to me? So let's assume that our client, the person that we're happen to be working for, is a wholesaler of blackberries. Okay, a company that sells blackberries wholesale to these chefs that we happen to be talking about. Okay, they have a vested interest in these people. So what happens is that the pastry chefs essentially serve as gatekeepers to the wholesaler's profit. Okay, because unless they can convince the people with the purchasing responsibility, right, and the people with the authority to make the decision, unless they can convince them to buy their product, they don't make money. All right, so let's say that we interview these chefs because we know that this is our target audience, and we find out that one of their key concerns across the board, we interview 20 different people and we find out that across the board, the unanimous top thing on their list is, look, I have no way to monitor the freshness and or availability of the fruit from my wholesalers, my current wholesalers. Not only that, but I don't have any sense of, at the time that I order, I don't know how long it's been sitting there since it's been picked. And furthermore, once the order is placed, I don't have any intel on real-time shipping. Okay, we've been doing ground delivery, but the two suppliers that we work with don't have any way for us to track real-time shipment. So we have an estimated delivery date, but it's off. It never arrives when we think it's going to arrive, and we're always scrambling to play catch up. Either we have too much inventory or we don't have enough. Okay, so this is the scenario. This hampers their ability to be effective, right? It hampers their ability to serve their end clients who are restaurants, right? It hampers their ability to deliver fresh, baked food in a reasonable time frame and in a way that the food doesn't go to waste because it goes bad before the restaurant can sell it. So they can't meet their commitments. They're feeling pain, in other words. You see where we're going with this? We know who it is. We know what matters to them most. Here's what's happened. You've done two things at this point. You've defined a very specific audience, number one, and then you've defined a very specific experience that matters to them. This is a critical need. It's something that would motivate use. It's something that would, at the very least, get their attention long enough for your app or your promotions or whatever to have a conversation with them, to say, we think this could help you, and here's how. Unless you know who they are, unless you know what matters to them, whatever you send out there in terms of messaging, in terms of the app's features, functions, whatever, all of it falls on deaf ears unless you know who you're talking to and what they care about. All right? So that's what we've done so far. The third piece of this, to cement it, is understanding how our product, how this digital product that we're going to create, how this real-time tracking application that we've decided is important, is different from competitors. And there are two kinds of competitors. There are direct competitors, which means this other solution does the exact same thing that we're talking about doing. And then there's indirect competitors, which is, this is close to what we're doing, but it's not exactly the same thing, and people will probably use it because it's close enough. Okay? We as human beings, in business and consumer applications, do this a lot. All right? We will use the next best thing if there's some aspect of it that gets us there first. Could be price, could be convenience, could be we just haven't heard of anything else. Okay? The other thing I want you to understand about competition is this. It bears repeating, and it's going to make me digress a little bit, but it's really worth saying, and I want you to get this into your head. Anytime you're talking to a customer, a client, a stakeholder, I don't care who it is, if you ever hear the words, "we have no competition," that's your cue to exit. Okay? Abandon the projects right now. That's my advice, because there is no such thing. There is no organization in this world, there is no startup idea, there is nothing that is ever going to be created that does not have competition. Usually what's happening there is that people feel like, well, we don't have any direct competitors. We don't have anybody that does exactly the same thing that we do. But guess what? You definitely have indirect competition, because close enough for a lot of people is good enough in both business and consumer situations. Never forget that. There is always, always, always competition. Okay? So, we know that we have direct competition and indirect competition in our bakery chef scenario here. Our direct competition, since we're working for a BlackBerry wholesaler, is Bob's Blackberry Bar. Okay? And let's say currently they have 70% of the target market that we want. 70% of the chefs that we talk to are all using Bob. Why? Well, because up to now, he's the most established. For a certain period of time, he was the only game in town before our client started their business. And it's just habit at this point, right? And they're too busy, heads down busy, to even think about anything else, because they haven't had a good reason to really explore their options. So, the question for us as product developers, as designers, as UXers, as developers, as product owners, whatever it is, the question we have to ask is, what can we do that Bob can't, right? What can we provide that he can't, now or in the future, right? What's going to take him a long time to provide that maybe we could do right now? And let's say we do implement this real-time tracking feature that we're talking about, right? Along with our deliveries. And it tells them, you know, when the fruit was picked and when it hit the warehouse and when it's going to be shipped, so they have sort of an idea of expiration. Is that enough? Is that enough to unseat Bob as king of this particular hill? Is it enough to make people think about working with us instead? That's a business question. It's a business outcome, right? So that's how we're figuring this out. And in addition, quite frankly, are we on par with everything else Bob is doing, right? So it's not always enough just to say, well, we do this and he doesn't. You also have to be on par with whatever your competition is doing. So you start there and then you say, all right, what's our ace in the hole? What can we do that's going to make people wake up and say, oh, wow, I should at least try this? Because that sounds really, really good. That might really alleviate a lot of my pain. So that's direct competition. Bob is your direct competitor. But what about indirect competition? What about Joe's Raspberry Farm? Okay, maybe, and I'm making this up completely, maybe the raspberry industry as a whole is making a play to get used more in pastries, and they've got promotional campaigns and marketing, and they're, you know, pushing hard to sort of get a piece of that pie. It's not blackberries, but it's fruit, and it gets used in desserts, so what about them? All right, if the price of raspberries decreases dramatically and it's significantly cheaper than blackberries, that may be enough to make one of these pastry chefs say, wow, we could cut our costs by 40% if we started using raspberries in half of what we're baking and delivering here. Okay, so indirect competition matters as well. You can't just look at situations that are apples to apples. You have to look at both. So again, we've asked 3 questions and we've answered 3 questions to the best of our ability. Who is our target audience? What experiences are valuable to them? And how is our product different from competitors? And remember, direct competitors and indirect competitors both absolutely matter. If you don't know the answers to these questions at least some fundamental, reasonable level, you are setting yourself up for a lot of pain, because you are essentially shooting in the dark in terms of what your feature and function set should be, in terms of what people are going to care about or not care about. You're shooting in the dark and you're hoping that you hit something. Okay? I always say and have always said, I don't like to guess. Okay? Especially with other people's money. I want to know. I don't want to guess at what matters to them. I don't want to guess who they are. I don't want to guess what experiences are going to differentiate us from competitors. I want to know, to whatever degree is possible. I want to know. That's where research comes in. When you don't do this kind of due diligence, you know, you're working for your client, you know, let's say we launched this app and there is no real-time tracking feature. Why? Because we never investigated enough to even find out that this was a problem for people. Okay? We didn't interview users. We said, oh, well, you know, we kind of know who this audience is, or we relied on the client to say, well, no, we know who these people are, and we know what they want from us, and we left it at that. Okay? We didn't do any independent research. So we launched the app. Doesn't include that feature. What happens? It probably doesn't get used. Okay? It doesn't get picked up. It doesn't convince anybody to give it a shot. There's nothing there that says, this is worth your time. There's nothing that pulls these chefs away from their current reality that says, your life could be a lot better if it was this. When that's not a component of the final product, nobody uses it. When nobody uses it, the client starts to wonder what exactly they paid you for, right? We did all this work, or if it's internal, they say, man, we just spent 4 months, we spent a lot of people's time, which equals money for the company that could have been used in other places. What did we get? Okay, what did we get for our money? Why did we do this in the first place? Okay, if we didn't get any value back. When that happens, when someone starts wondering why they paid you or why they spent all this time and money, they start to get aggravated. And when they get aggravated, the first thing they do is start pointing fingers. Why did you do this? Why did you do this way? Why did you decide this was a good idea? Why did you steer us down this path? When that happens, when fingers get pointed and they're pointed at you, it's a terrible place to be. Okay, so aside from all the other reasons, you never want to go down a path of product development without knowing the why. You don't ever want to be in a situation where you've led a client down a path on a guess. It's dangerous and it never ends well. Okay? And I say that from experience. I have made those mistakes more than once early in my career. Okay, I really have, and it was painful and it lasted a long time. And once you have a couple of those, you never do it again. All right. So I hope you found this part valuable. We are going to dig deeper into this question of value in the next installment in the series. Until then, as always, I invite you to visit givegoodux.com to find tools, advice, and tips and all sorts of valuable things that can help you work a lot smarter instead of harder. And of course, I invite you, if you have not done so already, to check out my new book, Think First. It is on a roadmap for UX strategy and product strategy, and all the things that we've talked about in this video are discussed in much deeper detail within those pages. Until next time, give good UX.